was Circle's vision, just sort of at the outset, and then maybe we can piece in some of these acquisitions and how they fit?
Sure. Yeah. So when we started Circle about 5.5 years ago, we were very excited about cryptocurrency technology. Having built companies for the past 25 years in other internet industries, in the software industry, in the media industry.
Yeah, Brightcove, right?
That's right. Brightcove is the last company I founded. We saw a pattern of open, decentralized networks and open protocols and open standards changing how different industries work. And so when we saw Bitcoin specifically, and then the broader kind of technical and architectural pattern of crypto, we became immediately convinced that this would become kind of the new foundation for how the global financial system works, and that you could, over time, take fundamental building blocks like fiat currency, financial contracts, and rebuild those on top of what we now talk about as tokenized assets and smart contracts. And back then that wasn't really technically possible.
Right.
But there were technical proposals, there were white papers, there were other ideas for how that would happen. And we were convinced that over 5 to 10 years that those things would become possible, and that gradually we'd be able to build the sort of foundational platforms for the financial system, the markets that are needed to actually have that run, but in an entirely digitally native form, and then ultimately the consumer products that allow people to get the benefits out of that.
Yeah, and so you have several of those. I think I've counted 4 now, but I might have been missing some. So you've got Circle Pay, you've got Circle Trade, you've got Circle Invest. Then you added Poloniex in February, as Aubrey mentioned, and that brought you into the cryptocurrency space. So with SeedInvest, what was the thinking there? How did that fit into the original vision, and how does that make you stronger?
Yeah, so about a year and a half ago, with Ethereum's kind of production readiness, we got very excited about the idea of taking existing assets and tokenizing them. We had built originally a payment system that kind of directly converted between, say, dollars and euros and Bitcoin, and allowed Bitcoin to be kind of the settlement network. But Ethereum made a huge improvement in what was possible. And we wanted to rebuild what we did around that. One part of that was basically kind of creating fiat tokens. That was something we launched last week, which is US Dollar Coin, which is a ERC20 token, but it's a whole asset-backed token model, which obviously will relate to security tokens, as we talk about in a minute. But the growth in ICOs were really a pivotal moment, because it was this sort of concept of how can businesses issue digital investment contracts directly over the internet and allow individuals and institutions, but individuals from all around the world, to invest in those. And so it was an incredible experiment in crowdfunding. Mm-hmm. It was an incredible experiment in how do you apply tokens and smart contracts as a new capital formation model. And we got very excited. And our belief was that the technology was sort of getting close to a point where we would sort of see what we like to say as the tokenization of everything, where essentially all kind of assets, whether they be existing assets like a dollar, a share of stock, a piece of physical property, but also newly, truly digitally formed assets. So an investment contract written entirely in code that doesn't have an external, say, share agreement or something, that kind of truly digital native assets would be born, and that there'd be marketplaces for those, and that those marketplaces would create platforms for businesses to form capital, to grow, and obviously that would create significant opportunities for people who want to invest. We acquired Poloniex in February of this year. They were really innovative in being one of the very first marketplaces for all these alternative assets in the United States, and grew very, very fast. They needed help kind of scaling and growing the business, but that was the first key step in building a token marketplace that can support a really broad range of digital assets, from currency assets to commodity assets to ultimately what we'd like to see is the trading of security token assets as well. So that led us to Ryan and the SeedInvest team, and really wanting to have a primary issuance platform for raising capital for businesses to form capital, but to marry that with the crypto infrastructure that we've been building out to be able to allow businesses and ultimately even individuals, we hope to issue digital securities over the internet and allow investors, both accredited and unaccredited investors, to invest in those. And ultimately to provide global secondary liquidity platforms for those as well, which is a really tremendous opportunity that crypto makes possible.
So you mentioned primary and secondary. How is that going to appear in the ecosystem?
Well, so today, obviously, we have kind of crypto exchanges, and primarily, those are, at least in the United States, trading currency-like assets and commodity-like assets, and that's significant. And we think there'll be a lot more of both of those. Utility tokens, consumer tokens, things like that are going to be a major phenomenon that continues to grow, and we continue to issue, to list those. So that's a secondary trading platform. People who are launching blockchain projects, people who are forming those, ultimately need those tokenized assets to trade on exchanges, and we provide one of those secondary kind of venues. I think SeedInvest, obviously, to date has built a very nice business helping hundreds of businesses raise capital directly over the internet, issuing securities over the internet, and pioneering the compliance models and the governance, working with the governance models and regulatory models to do that. And really, we look at things like security tokens, crypto, and equity crowdfunding platforms as really kind of made for each other in terms of ultimately where we see the democratization of finance going. Yeah,
they're cousins for sure. How in terms, you mentioned the sort of the navigating the regulatory jungle. How will you deal with the blue sky law question?
Sure. I mean, there are obviously a lot of open questions about which exemptions will allow people to trade in which venues over what time frames and so on. And I think there's a lot of attention on this right now at a national and a state level. And I think we're hopeful that we'll see waivers or exemptions that ultimately allow certain classes of registered securities offerings to trade on ATSs and other secondary venues. But obviously, there's a process that has to unfold for that to all transpire. But I think everyone sees the benefits of that. I think they see that we now have the ability to convene these digital asset marketplaces on the internet. That's a tremendous opportunity for businesses, for individuals. And so, if we can kind of marry the technical possibilities with some of those, improvements in the regulatory environment, it's very significant, we think.
Yeah, amazing. So what about one of the catchwords that we've heard today is interoperability. How are you envisioning tackling that challenge?
It's really critical. I mean, I think the whole benefit of rebuilding the financial system on crypto infrastructure is that you're building on open platforms and you're building on open rails. It's sort of like, in my last company, it was about online video, completely different. But when you have open standards, then you can, publish video and have it reach any device anywhere in the world instead of having to cut a deal with Comcast, right? So open networks, interoperability are foundational to what makes the internet achieve the network effects that it has. If you can apply those same principles in finance, that's really revolutionary. So what we did even just last week, we launched US Dollar Coin. That's an open standard protocol and an open source project and an open standards body called Center, which is designed for enabling interoperable issuance of fiat over blockchains. And so it's, from our perspective, really critical that you have fungibility and interoperability for any type of financial asset. And so fiat is a kind of base layer. If we don't have standards for fiat, then we can't do anything else, basically. And so things like security tokens, we're very encouraged by things like ERC 1400, 1410, and a lot of the early ideas that companies are pursuing to standardize interoperability for compliant securities. There's a lot of good work. I think it's key that industry players work together on that, because that's how we're going to get this to blossom, and not just for the US market, but globally.
Yeah. So tell us more about the SeedInvest sort of prognosis. Where do you see that fitting in? How's it going to change Circle, or how is Circle going to change it?
Yeah, so like I said, I think we see it being a very, very complementary match to the broader set of things that we're doing. I think when we think about tokenization and we think about this idea that we're sort of on the cusp of completely new forms of capital formation and value exchange, first and foremost, we know that a lot of those forms of securitization are going to happen in a regulated context under broker-dealers and trading in regulated contexts. And so it's critical that we be able to do that. But I think the second is, the internet has made multi-sided marketplaces work for an incredible range of businesses. I mean, when the internet got started, the notion that you would kind of go on a marketplace and buy something from a random person who you'd never met before and trust that they're going to ship it to you, right. eBay, Amazon, et cetera, that was crazy. The idea that you would, just take out your phone and a stranger would pull up and you'd get in their car and they'd drive you somewhere completely nuts. They used to feel like that's like hitchhiking, right? Like you're going to get killed, you're going to get cut in pieces, or whatever. The idea that you would just randomly go stay at some person's apartment for the weekend because they said you could, like, those are really crazy things. And I think that multi-sided marketplaces enshrine, they deal with information asymmetries and trust in really powerful ways. And if we can apply those same principles to how businesses raise capital, it's going to be possible for investors everywhere in the world, in every corner of the planet, to make decisions about investments and investing in investment opportunities in ways that have just never been possible. It will liberate capital, allow for a much broader free flow of capital formation, and ultimately, if we can connect through the open internet model of crypto, billions of people to common platforms where they can exchange value directly over the internet, freely exchange value without any toll extracted for payments, and do that with billions of people and connect them through economic contracts that are mediated by blockchains, I think it is pretty dramatic. And I think it will make the web look like a cute experiment, comparatively speaking, in 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, I think you might have a little business there. So when you look into your crystal ball and you look ahead, say, 18 months, where do you see this environment, the STO environment? Is it still going to be kind of wrangling with regulation to get on its legs? Is it going to be taking off? Are we all going to be fractionalizing our neighbors' houses and getting it on their house? What are we going to be doing?
Yeah, there's a lot of hype and a lot of excitement, and it's all, I think, very justified. And I think with a lot of these kinds of things, ultimately the impact of these things is actually far, far greater than any of us anticipate, and it's applied in ways that none of us can even imagine, but it actually ends up taking longer to get there than we think. Mm-hmm. And I think this is one of those areas. But what I would say is, really ever since we moved into acquiring a crypto exchange, we, from the early days of Circle, have worked closely with government and regulators because it's key. We have spent a lot of time with securities regulators in the US and globally. And what I'd say is, there's a real openness to this space. There's a real understanding that this isn't just a bunch of Ponzi schemes or fraudsters. There are absolutely bad actors, but this is fundamental in terms of what's possible. And regulators want to work with industry to get this right. They want to figure out how, if there is a square peg, round hole problem, how to ultimately reconcile that. And so I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of work to do for industry to work with regulators and supervisors to figure this out, to figure out how we manage the risks that people care about, protecting investors, the integrity of the market itself, and get through that. And I think we will. I think we'll get through that, and I think we'll come out the other side in 2019 seeing a lot of new platforms, a lot of new offerings, a lot of new very real use cases that are getting going. And hopefully it will accelerate from there. So we're cautiously optimistic about that, and obviously have a very long-term vision, which we think is exciting too.
Can you give us a little hint into your long-term vision? If it's any more than what you've already described?
But certainly it touches on a lot of the things that we've talked about here. I mean, I think ultimately we'd like to see a world where an individual or a small business owner is able to securitize their output, whatever that might be, and to offer that security in a very seamless way, easily online, for that security to be offered in a marketplace and surfaced in ways that are really straightforward for investors to participate in and understand from every corner of the earth. And to do that nearly instantly with virtually no cost, and to connect the economy in those kinds of ways. We think that's on the horizon, certainly in the next 3 to 5 years.
Well, thank you so much for taking these few minutes to come and share with us what you're working on, what you're up to, and about your SeedInvest big move today. We really appreciate it. We know how busy you are, and we're rooting for you.
Thank you.
All right.